for about a year and a half, I was going full steam on a website called Evolving Architect. So that's what the original kind of version of this whole thing was. Because in my mind, it was, you are always evolving as a person, as a designer, as a creative. So I wanted architect somehow in the name too, because that's really what my focus was, niching down to just talk to architects. And but I'm also a lifetime learner, and I'm interested in a lot of different things. So I'm like, let's just talk about all these things that I'm getting questions about from emerging professionals, people taking, like, it was the kind of typical things. It was like how to pass this exam, or like all these emerging professional type questions that would come up. So then about a year and a half into that, I decided, hey, why don't I make a course? I'm going to make a course, and it's going to be 6 or 7 hours long. I'm going to put everything I have into it. It's going to be great. I'm going to pick a topic that I think is easy for me, which it is, but then you spend 6 or 7 hours worth of videos and it's like,
Uh-huh.
it's a lot. So I took this course, or I made this course called SketchUp Architecture, which was all about making your first architecture project in SketchUp from scratch, whole 9 yards, everything I've ever learned about the program. And I got to this point where I couldn't do it anymore. I just like couldn't. I just like had this moment where um, I like yeah, I just like it stopped me in my tracks. I don't know what it was really, but it was more of like a, I am not okay. I kind of looked in the mirror and I was like, I am the heaviest weight I've ever been. I am like like a shadow of my former self. Like I used to play soccer in high school, and I couldn't do any sports in college because that was frowned upon because you were in architecture and everybody knew you were like locked to your desk.
Yeah.
But I started drinking inordinate amounts of soda and coffee and food and things like that. And I was just like not exercising, not taking care of myself, pushing myself way too hard. And I just kind of was like, this is not, I'm going to I could end up like doing really serious damage to myself, or like end up like giving myself a heart attack or something like that. And I just like, this has got to change. So I actually stopped writing for pretty much an entire year. I told my newsletter, hey, I'm coming back at some point, maybe, but thanks again. I need to go do something right now. So I actually, in about a month from when we're recording this, it'll be 7 years since I've had soda. So I just like stopped cold turkey. I'm like, I need to pick a thing right now, whether or not it matters, that is intentional and kind of represents for me what I'm trying to do with my life.
Hmm.
So I could probably, like, I don't know if I'm actually addicted to it or not, but I just like one of those things where I'm like, mentally I needed that break. And so I stopped drinking soda. I started actually exercising again. Um, I lost 75 pounds, and I just became like a different kind of person again. Um, Something that was like I guess what I would call the best versions of my past self, but also like taking the lessons that I had learned as I had gone so that I didn't repeat past mistakes. And I've been trying to kind of get back to um, I just keep learning. Like you said, everybody's learning all the time. I'm just taking new lessons and trying to share them as I go. And the thing that was interesting to me about that whole journey is at some point I just started writing about it again. And that's when somebody randomly asked me to speak at a convention because they were looking for somebody who talked about burnout and talked about and was like an architect or like was in
Hmm.
the profession. And I've actually been talking about it ever since. And that was 3 or 4 years ago. And that's just been more or less a focus for me, is just somebody mentioned it to me the other day that I didn't actually realize this is what I was doing, but it's called peer work in therapy, where if you are somebody with an experience that like directly ties you to a condition, whether it's addiction or burnout or something that has actually happened in your life and you can relate to it, that's kind of, I guess, what I'm doing in my own way. I'm not a therapist or like a medical professional, but I didn't realize that that's kind of what I was I never thought like, going back to 2008 Mike when I'm like just graduating college, I didn't think I was going to like start talking about burnout one day, but like it's given me so much like genuine pleasure to help people who are in that tough spot, whatever their burnout is. It could be from overwork or relationships or anything could cause the burnout. It's just like, how do you get out of it and how do you prevent it from happening again? I think is kind of the bigger thing. I see a lot of people who burn out cyclically and it becomes their life.
Yep.
And I would never want that for anybody. So that's kind of where the transition happened about a couple of years ago. I kept Evolving Architect going for a while, and then it just at some point it just didn't really jive for me anymore. It was kind of like with you were saying, like you transitioned into different chapters of your creativity, and at some point I was just like, I want to be known as Mike, so I just transitioned it to my name, and at MikeLaValley.com, I've been talking like it has transitioned even more since then. But I took a creative writing class from like an author that I really like, and I started telling stories and sharing ideas about wellness and burnout and work life balance and personal development. And it's more geared towards a global creative professional. So, designers, engineers, artists, writers. It's not just about architects anymore because I think the one thing I realized for me was that there's a lot of people out there that are hurting or need help or like want to better their lives. And it's not just architects. I'm still an architect and will probably be an architect for the rest of my life. But it's one of those things where I notice a lot of patterns in people who are creative are, in my opinion, are more likely to burn out. So I wanted to help
Hmm.
those people kind of be able to find me and talk about those things a little bit more globally.
Yeah, because those are all the careers that it's more passion, and people tend to put their heart and souls behind
Right.
things. Like
Exactly.
we're putting our heart and soul into buildings, and just because we're choosing the art of a structure doesn't mean that other people don't burn out for having that similar passion behind their projects.
Yeah. I think that a lot of happened. That's why you're seeing a lot of things that happened during the pandemic happen with medical professionals too, because it's that generosity, it's that
Hmm.
emotional awareness. People who are tend to be more emotionally intelligent, I think, and creative. That combination is great for the world, but bad for the individual sometimes when they go too hard.
Yeah. Now, do you think, looking back on your burnout experience,
Hmm.
do you feel it was more you pushing yourself outside the office, or were there office factors that you also took steps to like restructure your life between work and stuff you're doing outside the office?
Yeah, 100%. I think my burnout was in a lot of ways self-induced, at least when I experienced it. But I think the vast majority of people, and like I don't want to say it wasn't part of my job because I had these like I remember a couple of times where I think of it more or less like a like kind of like if you tracked out or mapped out a roller coaster. Like you have these high highs and you have these valleys. Sometimes you're going to have moments in your year, regardless of what great place or bad place you work at. There's always these moments where there's a deadline and it's a major one, and it's like the end of a design phase or a construction phase start or something where that's the moment where you have to kind of put more of your time and effort in. And I've always known that about the profession, and I'm okay with that side when it's controlled.
Hmm.
And I think the problem that I see a lot of people get into, and that I experienced a little bit, was the roller coaster doesn't really go down as much. It just kind of like if
Does
it's
a
like up really high and then it's just kind of right like riding up like it's just always at that like high level. And I think when people don't have the chance to recover and rest, and like, as an example, this week in particular at work, I have kind of a chill week. Like, I didn't have a crazy amount of meetings, I didn't have a crazy amount of like deadlines, but I was still able to be productive, do work on projects, and you need those kinds of weeks throughout your year to actually like even if it's just as simple as like organizing files in your folders that you're just like
hmm
throwing around and like the chaos needs to get controlled. Um, I see though a lot of like in my own work life, I had a couple like 60+ hour weeks, that were few and far between. But like when you really get into like 60 plus, like it's not a great thing. And when I hear these stories about people doing like 80 plus, and like you're just basically not
Yeah.
leaving the office,
It's not a
it's
trophy.
it's not, yeah, it's not. I think that's really well put, because it's not like, what are you getting out of that at the end of the day? Like, the reality, the one quote I heard, or like maybe I'm paraphrasing this from something, is like, if you, I'm not saying I want this for anybody, but let's say you got hit by a bus, right? And the office needed to keep moving. They would replace you within, a couple weeks. They would find somebody else to do your job. And when that hit with me, I was like, I like the people I work with. I appreciate my bosses. Like, they're kind people. Everybody is great to work with. But that is true. If I
Hmm.
left the office, they would need to keep going, and they would need to find somebody else to do it. And I think the reality is that we want to think of, I see a lot of people, and myself included, I wanted to see the office that I worked at as like the studio setting, where you're like hanging out with friends and you're doing the things that you love to do in studio, and you just feel like you're all being this creative team. But the reality is that you're working for a business that has to
Hmm.
operate in a business way. And I think that disconnect with creatives is where the tension comes from, because you want to do a good job, thrive in your career, do great work, and then there's this overwhelm that kind of comes into play. So for me, I had a couple of those weeks on top of the weeks where, like, I had a weekly newsletter. I've basically been writing a weekly newsletter for as long as I can remember. But if you put on top of the like couple weeks where it was crazy, throughout the year, and then you put a newsletter that takes 5 hours to write throughout the week,
Hmm.
and then you're writing content for social media, and you're just like trying to be everywhere all at once. It's just, and that course, like, it was just like it was like too much. Like, I couldn't keep it all up, and then try to do anything well. Like, you become, I made this sketch once of like an octopus with like, a phone in one hand and like a pencil in the other, trying to do like all these things. And that's how you feel. You feel like you're being stretched out into too many different directions. The things that I've done since then have been really just to like create very hard boundaries for myself. Like, a lot of people that I know keep office email on their phones. I don't. I have, my phone is my phone. I've been at places where they've offered to pay for my phone as like an office phone, or get me an office phone. I don't do that. Like, when I leave the office, I am leaving the office, and I will come back to the office and work just as hard when I'm at the office. But there's this Cal Newport, who is the writer of Deep Work, has a really good kind of, um, not mantra, but like a tip that I always think of, is like, actually think of yourself like at the end of the week shutting down, like shut down your computer, close it down, put it away, like actually say I'm done, and then walk away.
Hmm.
Because you can't, as a creative person, you can't actually function properly without having the recovery and the separation and the boundaries and the rest to actually do so. So I just made those kinds of boundaries, and I learned more about myself and kind of what I was able to tolerate. And yeah, we can go wherever you want to from there, but that's kind of the big picture where I was. The boundaries is like the big one, is like really saying, this is the time I leave every day. This is the time I'll be at work every day. But other than that, my life is, everything else outside of work is my life, and I'm doing that my way.
Yeah. And everybody's got to figure out what boundaries work for them in terms of
Right.
the, you say they're hard, very like hard boundaries, but I always
Sure.
look back at when my grandfather was working, it was your phone is at your desk. And if
Hmm.
you're not physically at your desk, you're not getting that call. And it was mail, and everybody still survived. Things were still happening. But when they left at the end of the day, they could not get a hold of them. And so it's, you don't need to have this constant connection, but we're
Right.
always striving to have all these responses now.
Yeah.
Um, I know the kind of shutting down the laptop, I always refer back to Atomic Habits. And
Yeah.
it's, if you want something to be a habit, make it visible. Like, if If you're trying to take a daily vitamin and remember it, keep it out and on the counter so you see it. If your
Right.
laptop's open and easily accessible and you just have to even just put in your password and you're going to be more likely to go in there. But if you fully log out of all your programs, if you fully shut down the laptop, you close it and you put it away, the odds of you going and opening up that laptop again, it's going to be a lot
Yeah.
more work. And I
Yeah.
learned that the hard way. I would leave models open so I could easily, like, okay, get home and I could jump back on if I wanted. And it would take me 5 seconds and I'd be back in the model. But now
Yeah.
that's like, oh, nope, I would have to like act like large models have to get 10 minutes to get everything loaded back up. Nope, okay, I don't have the time for that and I'll go do something else. But you like
Yeah.
trick yourself into setting the boundaries.
Yeah. No, that's a really good one. The one question that I got asked a year or two ago when I was at a speaking, a gentleman came up and asked at a Q&A, like, so or do you own a business? I'm like, are you a sole proprietor, or like, do you, like, just ask me directly? I'm like, no, I don't, like, don't own a business, but I'm an associate at a firm, and like, I'm at a fairly, like, high enough level that I see a lot of stuff, and like, I manage people and whatever. He's like, well, that's not the same. Like, I'm like connected to my work, and my work and my life is like one giant, like, pool of stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, you still have your choice of when you connect and when you don't connect. And I think that that's important, especially for anybody who works at home, or for anybody, there's still a lot of people who are remote. I know that there's a push in almost all the industries now to get people into the offices as much as possible. And whether you believe in that kind of connection or not, I think personally, I think it's important to have a mixture of both that makes flexibility work for people. But to his question, I was like, you just need to make the boundaries work. If you're always on, then you're never off.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.